Hello and welcome to our final History Brown Bag presentation of 2020, which happens to be the 150th anniversary of Greeley. We will be opening two time capsules, one buried at the Civic Center in 1967 and one buried at Lincoln Park in 1970, both set to be opened in 2020. We are excited to have you here. We will have City Manager Roy Otto speak about growing up in Greeley and the 150th anniversary. And then Peggy Ford Waldo will talk about Greeley in 1870 and the 1960s and 1970s. Sarah Sachs will introduce museum staff who will open the time capsules and share some of the items. Retired Assistant City Manager Becky Safrick will share comments submitted about the time capsules and closing remarks about the 150th anniversary of the city. I will briefly introduce Roy, Peggy, Sarah, and Becky, and then Roy will begin. Roy is a native of Colorado and is an adopted son of Greeley. Moving here in the 9th grade, he attended John Evans Junior High and then Greeley West High School, two of Greeley's famous round schools. He spent summers prior to moving to Greeley visiting his grandparents who lived in Cranford. One of his favorite things to do was feed ducks with his grandma at Glenmere Park. He just finished his 15th year as city manager and served as assistant city manager for approximately 6 years before assuming the role of city manager. He works hard for Greeley and has a heart for and is passionate about Greeley and keeping it an attractive city in which to live, work, shop, play, and/or visit. Peggy Ford Waldo has worked for the City of Greeley for 42 years in the museums. She is a historian with an extremely in-depth knowledge and understanding of the history and development of Greeley, and of the collections and documents in the collection at the City of Greeley Museums. She has answered so many questions about Greeley history and has dropped projects to help me with my projects numerous times over the years. She is a great example of a dedicated employee and public servant, giving selfless customer service with a smile. Sarah Sachs is the City of Greeley Museums manager, overseeing Greeley's 4 museum sites, their exhibits, programming, special events, historic preservation, and collections. Sarah previously served as Greeley Museum's Curator of Collections for 5 years, during which time she managed the museum's collections containing over 100,000 artifacts and archival materials. Sarah has worked in museums in Leadville, Colorado, Portland, Maine, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. She holds an MA in archaeology and a BA in history. She has a heart for Greeley's history and sharing it with the public. Becky Safrick worked for the City of Greeley for 42 years as the Director of Community Development and more recently as the Assistant City Manager. She worked hard to help make Greeley great and a thriving community and was involved in many of Greeley's important development projects, as well as unique Greeley programs like the University District, the G-Hope program, the establishment of Greeley's Creative District, and Greeley's Entertainment District. She retired in early September 2020. She was and is passionate about Greeley and the people connections that are special to her and to this community, as well as passionate about creative and unique sites and features of Greeley. Thank you, and I will now pass it off to Roy.
Thanks, Betsy. It's my pleasure to be here today. It's an exciting day to be able to share the history of a community that means a whole heck of a lot to me. So when I think about history, what's it say? It's about story. So his story, Roy's story, a little bit about Greeley. I want to share some of that before I turn the next time over to Peggy Waldo to talk about Greeley's history. But you'll see in my comments, Peggy is a big part of when I became city manager and what I envisioned we needed to be working on. But let me talk a little bit about what Greeley is to me. Both of my parents graduated from UNC, and my grandparents, as Betsy said, lived in Cranford on 19th Street, just across from where University High School was at one point. I lived in the basement of their apartment when I was in college and would walk down that alley to go to UNC my freshman year. But growing up, Greeley was a great place to come and visit. I would come and spend time with my grandparents, normally during the Stampede. And things that I remember about Greeley are definitely the feeding the ducks with my grandmother at Glenmere. But the trees were phenomenal. I loved the trees, and listening to the cicadas in the trees, sitting in my grandparents' front porch, drinking RC cola and going for walks in Cranford. Greeley, Cranford was Greeley to me from that standpoint. UNC was a fun campus to go play on when I was a kid, and it made me think about, although I grew up in the Denver metro area, that Greeley was the big city, because I lived in Arvada and there weren't skyscrapers, but there were in Greeley. And those skyscrapers I later found were dormitories. I thought that 11th Avenue was the biggest road I'd ever seen in my life, because there was a tunnel I could walk under that road. So those are some of my early memories of Greeley. I moved to Greeley when I was in the 9th grade. My parents purchased a business, Cottonwood Florist, that was in Cottonwood Square. And my uncle was going to run that business for us. And my dad wanted to retire from teaching music at Arvada West and then come and work with him. But unfortunately, my uncle passed away from cancer early on, and we moved here, and my mother ran that business. It expanded to be Cottonwood Florist and Candy. So Cottonwood Square is a big remembrance of me growing up here when Greeley adopted me, and Potato Brumbaugh's restaurant, and then the history to the book Centennial there. I was one of the first, was a first employee at Potato Brumbaugh's. I think I'm one of 5 or 6 people on planet Earth that were there for the opening and closing of Potato Brumbaugh's. So that facility means a whole heck of a lot to me. As a kid growing up, I remember going out to Shark's Tooth. But here's one big growth memory for me from Greeley. When I graduated from college and went to Florida, I came back to visit my parents, and we were going to drive to the west side of town, and we were going down 16th Street. And I remember telling my mom, it dead ends. Why are we going down 16th Street here? And lo and behold, since I'd been gone, 16th Street was pushed through from 38th Avenue to 47th Avenue. And I remember thinking, man, that's amazing how much Greeley has grown from that standpoint. Growing up in Greeley and attending Greeley West, I ran track and cross country, so I ran around a lot of roads. And I remember running on a dirt road that's 47th Avenue from 20th Street out to US 34. And it was all cornfields. And then working with Becky, once I was assistant city manager on the development of Center Place, is kind of surreal to me. So there's a lot of neat, memories I have of the community, and I love Greeley. And when I was appointed city manager, I connected with Peggy Waldo immediately, and I said, I know we have a proud history, and I really feel like Greeley is at a crossroads right now. We have a great prosperous future that we can grasp and be a part of if we would just connect to our history and the proud history that we have. So Peggy worked with me on creating a PowerPoint presentation that I termed Community at a Crossroads. And my first months of city manager were spent going around town and reminding Greeley of her proud history. And I know Peggy will talk to you some about that today, but everything from our water supply to establishing the state normal school, UNC, and our all these exports that we've had to make not only Greeley great, but a lot of other folks great. And I pulled up that PowerPoint just in the past week or so and was going over that again. And I looked at the last slide and it just said my vision. And my vision for Greeley at the time that I took the job was to move beyond a poor self-image and to reestablish Greeley's birthright as a premier Northern Colorado community. And I think over the past 15 years, we've done a lot of that. I learned a statement from Peggy when we put this presentation together. She said, it reminds me of what my mom used to always say, if you belittle what you have, it becomes less. If you appreciate what you have, it becomes more. And that became the statement that we use for every city council meeting when we do a What's Great About Greeley presentation. I started doing those, but I figured in the spiritual realm, if you will, the council has a higher authority than me, and I like to speak blessing over the community that we love. And council does that and communicates these great things that happen in Greeley. We moved on to create our Greeley Unexpected campaign to tout the great things about Greeley, and that has now moved to My Greeley. We know the power of principled relationships. Becky and I would talk about the barn raising philosophy and heart set of Greeley, Colorado. And it was that heart set that we engaged to create the Achieving Community Excellence program that has done so many great things, not the least of which coming alongside our school district to help our school district reclaim a lot of its proud history and stuff as well. I'm proud to be a District 6 graduate, and am proud to use that education and the other education that I was able to get after that to hopefully benefit this community. So it's with great pride that I turn over the balance of my presentation time, as well as any that Peggy has, for Peggy to tell us a little bit about more of the history of this great town. And it's great to be able to celebrate 150 years here. Peggy, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. Happy 150th anniversary, Greeley, Colorado. I'm excited to be a part of this presentation today. A bit new to technology. I hope that all of you can hear me. When Holly Berg, our exhibits curator, asked me to participate, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to take a deep dive back into my closet to dress appropriately for 1970. And so I was in luck. I'm going to hopefully share this with you. In 1970, the federal government approved pantsuits could be worn by women in federal offices. And of course, they were, adopted very quickly around every office in the US for women. Also, the Peacock Revolution came about. And of course, men's wear took a more colorful tack. Here is a Western style shirt with a lot of flower power. So amazingly, I still have these things in my closet. I guess I'm a pack rat. Any rate, lots of things were going on in 1970, and mainly they dealt with growth and conflict. Key themes. Also, some of the conflict was youth versus the establishment, or counterculture versus the establishment. So I'm going to hopefully give you a quick look at Greeley in 1970, the year that the time capsule was planted in Lincoln Park. There was growing concern that year about air pollution and the environment and the impacts it had on the health of the public, especially for those living in high density urban cities. Greeley's population in 1970 was 39,167. And in 2020, our population is getting close to about 115,000. So growth is the name of the game. In 1870, Greeley's had a 1 square mile city limit, the downtown area primarily, population of 480. So growth is really the name of the game. In 1970, Weld County's population was just a little over 89,000, and today 324,492 people. So I want to talk a little bit about the housing boom that Greeley experienced in 1970. Some of that was because the housing boom kind of mirrored the decay that was taking part nationally in cities. And people were taking flight from the cities, moving to the suburbs, and creating the expansion of the suburbs and the need for new residences. So in terms of growth, there was over $12 million in construction projects in Greeley in 1970, and that was the largest to date. There were 2,281 building permits, 256 single-family homes were built, 242 homes were remodeled, 40 new permits for apartment houses were issued, 47 commercial buildings were remodeled, 4 new gas stations were built, 3 new churches were built, and you can just see this trend towards growth was there in 1970. Taking you a little bit out to Weld County, Weld County issued $30 million in building permits, and the 2 biggest county projects in 1970 were Public Service Company of Colorado's Fort St. Vrain Nuclear Generating Station at Platteville, and a large fourth building to be built at the Kodak of Colorado plant just a bit east of Windsor. In Greeley, the Woodbriar subdivision of 50 acres was under consideration, as was the Southmore subdivision of 77 acres. A suburban shopping center was being considered, and that would of course would open as the Greeley Mall in 1973. Again, the city limits did not really expand too much. Roy hinted at this a bit, beyond 35th Avenue. And so the Weld County Commissioners approved a 250-acre subdivision, College Green Incorporated and Country Club Acres. So again, this borders Business 34 at the northeast corner of the Greeley Country Club, extends south to 20th Street and 47th Avenue, and immediately east of the new Ames College campus. So if you consider the scope of this project, this was a huge project which would eventually come into the city limits. It included a 5-acre shopping center at the corner of 47th Avenue and 20th Street, 117 acres reserved for 348 single-family homes, 38 acres reserved for multiple family structures, 35 acres for condominium development, a 21-acre retirement community, and 33 acres reserved for high-end estate-type residences. The University Mall was under construction with a new grocery store, King Soopers, and the Far Cafeteria. The Cooper Twin Theater opened in March, and the Women's Fashion Bar store at 8th Avenue and 9th Street opened. Another thing I found interesting about Greeley in 1970 was that literally from January to September, Greeley City Council and the entire town of Greeley was really embroiled in a lot of serious trash talk. And this again relates to growth. One of the topics for the council to consider was trash and garbage removal, the overtaxed and antiquated wastewater treatment plant, and foul odors from the sewage plant and the feedlots and other food processing plants adjacent to Greeley on the east. So let's get back to trash. The city of Greeley paid for the residential trash removal. But it wasn't working out all that well, and tougher sanitation ordinances were enacted. A sanitation officer was hired, and eventually the citizens just said, we don't want the city to be in the trash hauling business. And so the city of Greeley canceled its garbage contract on December 16th and said that private service for residents would begin on January 1st, 1971. There were lots of public hearings related to sewage facilities, especially taking into consideration the wind patterns and the smells from feedlots and other processing plants. So the 1936 and 1965 sewage treatment plant was really not adequate to handle a lot of the wastewater coming from the Montfort packing plant. At that time, they were processing about 2,500 head of beef at the packing plant and about 3,500 lambs on a daily basis. So you have to think about all of the waste coming from plants like that with a sewage treatment plant that could really only handle the wastewater from a city of about 40,000. And of course, Greeley was soon to exceed that number. And so one of the things that the city did was they looked at a new system of lagoons for wastewater treatment. And eventually that came to fruition by the end of the year when land was purchased on East 8th Street and north of the Webster feedlots for new lagoons to be built. That cost $158,000, and then the total project for that cost for that project was $820,000. The other thing, of course, that people were objecting to was the odor. And so the city of Greeley asked for volunteers. They said, we want to have people volunteer as sniffers, and throughout the day record at different times the smells and where they were coming from. That didn't work out too well because the city had to call an orientation meeting when nobody could locate the official list of sniffers. Andy Gertner was one of the people here in Greeley, an active citizen. He was sort of the unofficial mayor of Greeley's East Side, and he was on the Sanitation Commission, and he went to the Weld County commissioners and lobbied for lower tax assessment on properties in East Greeley because he said the odor reduces the value of the homes in the area. So again, the city then began in 1970 to really upgrade all of the wastewater treatment facilities because again, a lot of federal and state mandates for water and pollution control. Montfort was also in the news in Greeley on November 2nd and continuing for 56 days. Workers of Local 641, United Food Workers Butcher Union, went on strike for better wages. And eventually the strike was settled and they received a 20-cent per hour increase for their 3-year contract. So that affected about 500 workers at the time. And our new police chief, Chief Parkinson, said that it was one of the most orderly picket lines of strikers that he had ever seen. Everyone was well behaved. Schools, there were 12 grade schools in Greeley in 1970. And but with growth, voters went to the polls on May 19th, and they defeated a $4 million school bond issue by a 2-to-1 margin. So again, always a concern providing for educational facilities in a growing community. At the university, Colorado State College, its name was changed on May 1st to the University of Northern Colorado, and that required a lot of administrative reorganization. Bids were let for a new field house at UNC that year, but all of them came in $750,000 more than the $3.5 million allowed for the project. Fires, we're experiencing fires this year here on the Front Range in Colorado and across the American West. But on January 6th, there was a $350,000 blaze that destroyed quite a bit of the new library, Missioner Library, under construction at UNC. And later, October 30th, Wilshire Center experienced a fire that destroyed 2 businesses. That was a $313,000 fire. Some of the milestones in Greeley. Greeley in 1969 became a wet city. We no longer have the temperance clause in which hard liquor was not allowed to be served within the city limits of Greeley. And so Greeley issued its first bar and restaurant licenses in March. The first went to Mill and Dora Schoolrich for a packaged liquor store on 9th Street. The second went to the Gold Star packaged liquor store on 10th Street. And the first restaurant to receive a bar license was the Garden Kitchen Restaurant at 119 18th Street. Women were admitted to the first time to the UNC Air Force ROTC program at UNC. Mountain Vale hired Chip Howe, a returning Vietnam veteran, as its first male telephone operator. And uranium was discovered in northern Weld County. 5 churches observed their 100th anniversaries in Greeley in 1970. Those included the Baptist, the Methodist, the Congregational, the Episcopal, and the Presbyterian. In terms of recreation, the city of Greeley opened a new swimming pool at Island Grove Park. Skaters took to the ice at Glenmere Lake, and under the livestock building at Island Grove Park. There was a big joint initiative of the city, the county, the school district, the university, to plan to turn Island Grove into a regional recreational complex that included a covered stadium, swimming and fishing lakes, a trailer park, and a pari-mutuel racetrack. In June, fees started to be collected from golfers at Highland Hills Golf Course to help build a new clubhouse there. And Richard Perchlick and Clyde Davis announced in December that they would be constructing a ski area 8 miles east of Greeley on a north-facing hill. Other things that people look forward to in Greeley was the annual Crazy Days events put on by the downtown merchants, big sidewalk sales. And if you needed other things to do, Greeley had 162 clubs and organizations in 1970. Crime and police, oh boy, a lot was going on with crime. The longtime police chief, Earl Towning, resigned January 31st after 26 years on the job. And John P. Parkinson, a new chief from Menlo Park, California, was hired. And so this sort of began a reorganization of the Greeley Police Department and a big crackdown on crime. And so mainly the crackdown was on drug offenders, especially those using marijuana. So the Greeley Police Department cooperated with the Weld County Sheriff's Department, and they made mass arrests of drug offenders in April, June, and December. Parents were really concerned about their counterculture children. A popular booklet by Bob McNally was serialized in the Greeley Tribune. It was titled, "What to Do If You Find Your Child Blowing Pot." Disasters in Greeley. 51 people died in traffic accidents in Greeley and Weld County that year. Dutch elm disease struck Greeley, so we lost thousands of old growth elm trees. Historical designations that year, the Pioneer Fountain in Lincoln Park was listed on the State Historic Register. The Meeker Home was also listed on the state and national registers of historic places. And Nathan Cook Meeker, the founder of our community, was named to the Hall of Great Westerners at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. In terms of the courts, the first district attorney, Bob Miller, was appointed, and the county purchased the Sterling block to help relieve overcrowding in the county courthouse. In terms of culture, popular things were the Chrissy doll, the Stingray bicycle with the banana seat. Obviously, Legos were still really, really popular as well. Greeley celebrated its centennial, April 6th through October 10th. It had a production called Greeley 100 Grand. W.D. Farr was the chairman of the Greeley Centennial Committee, and in November of 1970, he was voted by the Greeley Board of Realtors as its Citizen of the Year for his many civic contributions to our community. The Greeley Tribune celebrated its 100th anniversary and published a 10-section historical edition highlighting the history of Greeley and Weld County. Back on October 12th, 1870, Horace Greeley visited Greeley, and he gave advice to Nathan Cook Meeker and the colonists. He said, "I'm really pleased to see the number of residents in the town, but I'd like to see you go out and build more ranches in the country." He also was not sure of Meeker's idea of building a fence around the Union colony lands to keep out the cattle, the longhorn cattle primarily at that time. And he said, you should really do what they do in Europe. You should hire herders to herd those cattle. But of course, with expansive open range in eastern Colorado, herding wasn't necessarily the best option. He encouraged tree planting, which continues to this day. and he was taken by some of Greeley's notable citizens in a buckboard out to see the head gate of the number 3 ditch on the Cache-la-Poudre River. So again, just a little quick bit of history at that time. And other things I think are kind of interesting. The popular song of 1970 was Bridge Over Troubled Water. And the #1 movie was Patton. Thanks, everybody. I'm looking forward to seeing what's in that time capsule.
Hello, I'm Sarah Sachs, City of Greeley Museums Manager, and I'm at the Greeley History Museum with Curator of Exhibits, Holly Berg, and Curator of Collections, Katie Ross. We are just about to open one of 2 of the time capsules that were buried years ago to celebrate Greeley's 150th anniversary. So the first of our 2 time capsules was buried in 1967 in what was then the newly constructed Greeley Civic Center. The capsule you see behind me was located just inside the Civic Center entryway, underneath this bronze capstone that has the city's logo, the date it was buried, and the date it is intended to be opened. Now, on May 9th of 2016, the Greeley Civic Center was raised, but not before the time capsule was unearthed and preserved by City of Greeley Museums. So it looks like we are getting going here. We've been waiting eagerly these past 4 years to open this time capsule to see all the treasures that are inside. So why don't we check in with our curators to see what they are finding? Looks like it's pretty crammed full of things. Oh man. Hello. All right, Katie's going to bring some items up to show you.
So I have a small selection here. There was this reel of tape taped onto the very top, and doesn't look like there's a label on it, so we'll have to check it out to see what's actually on the film. And then just a few other things that catch my eye here. We have the Greeley JC's proposed budget for May 1st, 67 to April 30th. Looks like there's a roll of developed photos. I can't see what they are. This one's lumpy. Let's see what's in it. So there's a lovely pen from Smith Battery and Electric that was on at 709 16th Street. And there's some more like letterhead and things from that company. Oh, here's a photo. Let's see what this is. So it's a group of, let's say, maybe teenagers, young adults, maybe into 20s, boys and girls. It doesn't have a label though, so I don't know who or what club they were or organization. Maybe there's something else in the paperwork that says what they were. Looks like there's some original artwork that people did and submitted of locations in town. There's McDonald's, church, the Greeley Journal. Yeah, there's quite a bit of artwork actually. That's really neat. So let's see what Holly's uncovered in her part.
Oh man, I've just about got the part built. Okay. you. Okay. Let's see what we've got here. At first glance, everything is very curled in, but that's probably because it was shoved, it was crammed full in that giant metal tube. So let's see, let's start here. Scrapbook on Civic Center Complex, 1966 and 67, kept by B.H. Cruz, city manager. That's fun. Should we open it? Oh, it's very curled up here. Thank you, Katie. Ooh. Starting off with some official legal looking language. Some resolutions and memos. Ooh, budgets. That's exciting. Oh man, and a whole bunch of, looks like Greeley Tribune articles cut out on the rest of the pages. So that might be fun to look through. All right, what else do we have here? Ooh. City of Greeley Annual Report from 1966. Let's see. We've got 50th anniversary of the Denver Rotary. A little book on that. The Outline of Classifications, a Guide for Rotary Clubs. Let's see. Lots of Rotary Club information, it looks like. That's fun. Okay, let's see. Ooh, these are fun. Okay, we've got a whole bunch of postcards, postcard type documents that have class pictures from Madison Elementary School. This one happens to be grade 5. And oh, the hairstyles on here are fabulous. So jealous. Oh, here's some more grade 5. Oh, and looks like they're labeled with all their names. That's helpful. Here's some more grade 5. Here's grade 1. Oh, these are going to be so much fun to go through. Man, I wonder how many of these people knew that their pictures would be saved in a time capsule. I bet that wasn't what was going through their minds when they took these pictures. And I wonder how many of them still live in Greeley. All right, let's keep going here. Got a large booklet from the story of the United States Capitol. That's fun. I wonder what the rationale was in putting that in there. History and general information for Greeley and living in Greeley. Business, industry, and agriculture in Greeley. And utilities, communications, and transportation, just in case we needed to know all of that. And then I'll finish up with this folder here. Greeley Central High versus Greeley West High. Ooh, sounds like a bit of a rivalry, doesn't it? Let's see what we have in here. Oh, vintage ad for Coca-Cola. Girl Scouts of the Mountain Prairie Council, printed on some fancy aluminum paper. All right, well, we're probably gonna have to look through this a bit later. It looks like it's mostly just a scrapbook. All right, very interesting things. So that was just a small selection of items from the 1967 time capsule. And now we're going to move on to our second time capsule. So our second time capsule is from 1970, and it was sponsored by the Greeley Newcomers Welcome Club, which is now called the Greeley Friends and Newcomers Club. So this time capsule was buried in Greeley's Lincoln Park. The time capsule was unearthed earlier this year on January 29th, 2020 by Greeley's Culture, Parks, and Recreation Department. So you can see in this photo that I shared with you, park staff are using a large chisel and pry bars to loosen the concrete around the granite capstone. And then they lifted it up from the surrounding sidewalk. Now, the people who were there, when they started to lift this up, they all realized that there was writing on the bottom of the capstone. And when they took a closer look, they discovered that the capstone was actually a repurposed tombstone, which you can see behind me here. It's a little, it made this a little farther back. Perfect. So our museum's registrar did a little research, and she discovered that this tombstone was actually, it was in Lynn Grove Cemetery at one time. And it was from Carl and Laura Gehring from the Lynn Grove Cemetery. So this old tombstone was replaced by a newer tombstone when Carl's second wife, Gladys, was added to the new tombstone. So this old tombstone was repurposed as a time capsule capstone. So the container of the 1970 time capsule is actually still stuck in the ground in Lincoln Park. You can see in this photo that they had a heck of a time trying to remove that time capsule from the ground. So instead, the contents of the time capsule were removed and taken to the museum. And now we're going to take a closer look at some of the items that were inside this 1970 time capsule.
So I chose an envelope titled Plans for Art Center and Gardens at Greeley, Colorado, as envisioned by George M. Houston and Mrs. Phyla B. E. Houston, and designed by C. Neil Carpenter and Associates. And that time capsule was filled with envelopes that were almost all this size of item. There's a few that were larger, but they're mostly this size. So it looks like there's a newspaper clipping regarding the gift of the land to the Creative Arts. There's a print made from a linoleum block made by a child at the Community Center for the Arts in summer 1970. It's really fun. Another clipping. And it looks like the plan that was talked about is just a typed up kind of narrative of what the plan was for the center. One more item. Oh, well, there's a brochure for the Community Center for the Creative Arts, and then also the home of the center in 1970 and an artistic drawing of it. Oops. That's all that my envelope held.
All right, let me share with you another envelope from the 1970 time capsule. So this envelope here, the only thing that's written on it says 4 museums. So who knows what's going to be inside? So it looks like this is a typed document of history of the museums of Greeley from 1870 to 1970. So it, I think it explains the different buildings in Greeley, the different museum staff over the years. This makes a lot of sense because the 1970 time capsule was buried just 2 years after the opening of the municipal museum. So I'm sure Greeley's citizens were really proud of their newest museum in the city. In fact, included in this envelope are a couple of postcards that were created that show images inside the newly opened municipal museum. So let me show you these. And I recognize a lot of these artifacts. This is the Meeker home, which I'm sure you recognize too. Yeah, some of these artifacts here, in fact, so here we have a Studebaker carriage that is on display at Centennial Village Museum. And the grandfather clock next to it is also on display in the Stevens house at Centennial Village. So let's see if they, maybe I'll wrap up with their final paragraph here. So they wrote, the hope is that the work done this period of time, the first 100 years of Greeley history, was not in vain, that there is still a museum and that some of the artifacts collected during this time are still intact. We are very sure that, that things are still changing, and the hope is that Greeley came through the first 150 years and is still prospering and holds forth some ideals the pioneers outlined in 1870. Well, I think museum staff from years past can rest assured that their wishes are being upheld, Current staff are working very hard to preserve and interpret and share Greeley's history with our community.
Hello, everyone. All right, I'll try to be a little bit speedy, but I want to share some things with you. All right, so I chose to open the Weld County General Hospital envelope from the Lincoln Park time capsule. It just kind of caught my eye, I guess, when I was going through the rest of the envelopes. So I haven't opened it yet, but I did do some general hospital history research here through our collection to kind of prepare for this segment. So in my research, I discovered that there were 2 different hospitals that were built right around the same time in the early 1900s here. And the first one is the Weld County Hospital up there in the top left corner. And then the second one is the Greeley Hospital. So the Weld County Hospital was built by Weld County appropriately, and they built it right around Island Grove. And it was meant to be more affordable and serve the less affluent populace around here. But it quickly gained a reputation as being a poorhouse, an isolation hospital, and a pest house. So it might not have been your first choice if you could afford to, see a private physician or get other medical treatment. But it was certainly there to help. And the second hospital, Greeley Hospital, that one was built right around 1904 at 11th Avenue and 16th Street. And at the time, it was considered to be one of the most distinguished buildings in Greeley. And they offered private rooms starting anywhere from about $15 to $25 per week. And one of those private rooms looked like that. Now, that's probably not the worst place to recover from an illness or an injury. You've got plenty of natural light, there's some windows, and there's even some art hanging on the wall there. And our second view here of that hospital is of the operating room. Of course, it is a far cry from operating rooms today, but hopefully it would get the job done if you needed it to. So here, our third picture here is that same building at 11th and 16th from around 1911. Now, this building underwent a few name changes over the years. So from 1904 to 1906, it was known as the Greeley Hospital. Then from 06 to about 1952, it was called the Weld County Public Hospital, but people probably around here still called it the City Hospital or the Greeley Hospital during that time too. And then in 1952, the hospital moved out, and this is now home to the Weld County Nursing Home. So they moved out because they were building this building. It's a big, big building with room for 220 hospital beds, and it cost $3.2 million to build, and they built it at 1801 16th Street. And with the move to this building, they changed their name to Weld County General Hospital, which is what's written on my envelope here. And they said 70 patients were transferred from the old hospital. And then daily rates for a double room arranged between $8 and $12, but they had private rooms available for $18 per day. So this was a much improved facility, and so much so that they were even allowed to do neurosurgery here. I don't know about you, but I always shudder at that picture. This picture was taken by Skeets Calvin in June of 1953, so not too long after that new hospital opened. And then in 1982, they changed their name once again to what we all know today as North Colorado Medical Center. So I chose this envelope because I've done a few exhibits where we have old medical equipment on display. And I don't know about you guys, but that just makes me cringe every time I think about it. Like the metal tooth key that was meant to pop a cracked tooth out of your jaw. Just even now, it's making me cringe. And I really hope there's nothing too cringeworthy in this envelope, but I don't know. Let's see, shall we? So it looks like we have a brochure for the Weld County Hospital, General Hospital. We've got a few different pictures here, a really nice aerial view of the new building. Got a little history and general information. Oh, that would have been helpful as I was researching my segment. Looks like a Tribune article. Your hospital growing to serve you today and tomorrow. That'll be a nice little comparison. And then we have a little flyer from an open house, March 18th and 19th, 1962, in observance of the completion of the new North Wing. It's nice and pretty blue there. Okay, well, I'm glad there was nothing super cringeworthy in there, not even a little bit, actually. So that wraps up the portion of our little segment of this program. But before I hand it off, I'd really like to invite you to come back in the spring and see the exhibit that we plan to open featuring more of these capsule items. I know we couldn't show you too many today, but just for time, but hopefully you'll get to come back and see the rest later. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Becky Safrick, who's prepared some comments from the public to share with you guys.
Thank you, Holly, and I'm delighted to be here. This is a fun project and lots of interesting questions about what was going through everyone's mind at the time. And we have some citizens who have submitted comments to help us understand the context of these. I'd like to offer a couple of other just general observations. My first memory of Greeley was as a little girl when I would come up with my grandmother to watch her show dogs at Island Grove. And that was years and years and years ago. And then I later arrived in Greeley to attend UNC and have been here ever since. Of course, like Roy, I am in love with the town. I think it's a wonderful place to not only call home, but also to raise a family and to help build its future. It so happens that I arrived just a year before the 50th anniversary celebrations that these are all commemorating. So I've been in Greeley for about 1/3 of its total existence. And as I reflected on that, I thought about what a significant feature it is to have that much time in a place and also understand a significant part of its history. I'd like to postulate, there was a question that was asked about why 2 time capsules, and if I could offer a little perspective on that, and this is something that the museum people could perhaps respond to and dig in further. When I was doing, when we were working on the city center development, we were toying with the idea of doing a time capsule because we were aware of the 2 that were out there. And when I did a little bit of research in the old Tribunes, the reason that the City Hall time capsule seemed to come about was because they accidentally found a previous 50-year time capsule when they went about deconstructing the old City Hall at the Lincoln block where it was before, the Lincoln Annex block. And so that gave them an idea about doing that. And Dorothy Zapka, who was the mayor around that time, was pretty enthused about trying to kind of carry on the tradition of having a time capsule to mark the significance of the events that were happening at that time. The second time capsule that was buried in Lincoln Park seems to have been a fundraiser for the Newcomers Club who came up with that idea. And I'll share with you some of the comments that were made from the folks who submitted those. A question might arise, are we thinking about doing another time capsule? And I think that's something that you can certainly lobby your council persons or Roy or someone about if you think that's a worthwhile adventure. We had planned to do a time capsule with the construction of City Center South. It was intended originally to be a 2-part construction. And so we, at that time, deferred thinking that when the second phase came about, that would be the time for the time capsule. So there's still time to do that if there's interest in that. We had planned a very different type of 150-year celebration for this momentous occasion. We had thought about starting the year. We'd been planning it for, of course, way before COVID. Had thought we'd do a reunion of our previous city council members in April on the date of our establishment, have a big birthday cake, invite the public, look at the time capsule, one of the time capsules at that time. We had worked with a local train museum. They were going to have the big boy steam engine come down from Cheyenne in June. And at that time, we would also celebrate the book called Confluence, which is all about the water in Greeley and a very significant historical piece to celebrate. By fall, we thought we would be opening the second time capsule and sharing stories about the community from a different perspective. Didn't work out that way, but we're a hardy bunch and we have found a way to adapt in this unusual 2020 year. So with no further ado, let me read to you some of the comments that have come in. We've got 8 time capsule memories that people have shared with us. The first is from Bob Wiggins. Bob writes, our class was involved in the 1967 capsule. I can't remember what was in it, but I'm excited to see it. I think a lot of folks are eager for the museum staff to start sharing some of that either online or in another way. I might say Bob Wiggins has been totally dedicated to finding out more about this time capsule and being excited about it. I know that I've spoken with Bob over the last several years when the news was that we were going to be opening the time capsule up. The next comment comes from Dick Benning. Dick writes, my ex-wife, Dixie Manier, was past president of the Newcomers Club of Greeley, along with Joanne Mitchell, vice president. They buried the time capsule 50 years ago as a fundraiser. It was a huge success and had a huge crowd, which included the mayor, the governor of Colorado at that time, who was John Love, and many city officials. Along the same family line, Jeff Rusk writes, I was 9 years old at the time. My mother was involved in the project. I remember putting in a small 48-star flag and some coins. Something happened where we had to lower my 5-year-old brother down the shaft to retrieve something before sealing it up. There's more about that to come. So those are Jeff's memories. And then Betsy collected a memory from Barbara Rusk. And Barbara writes, the 1970 time capsule was a fundraising project for the Newcomers Club, which had 75 members and met once per month. It was for Greeley's centennial. Barbara Rusk, a club member, suggested and planned the time capsule. She contacted Thompson Pipe and Steel in Denver, purchased a 6 to 9 foot long steel pipe for $75, and the members sold 160 manila envelopes to put things into the time capsule. Thus, all those manila envelopes that the museum staff just shared with you. Small envelopes were $5 and large envelopes were $10. They raised $1,600 and gave it to the Boys and Girls Club. People who purchased envelopes put their names on the envelope and maybe their address. She contacted a monument company in Denver and got a used piece of granite with engraving on one side to be opened in 2020. They spent $35 on that, and that covered the time capsule. She called Governor Love's office and spoke with him and invited him to come and seal the time capsule. He came to Greeley and was honored to seal it. There was a parade, and the club put the time capsule on a flatbed pulled by a tractor to take it to Lincoln Park. Very official. After everything was in and they were about to close it permanently, a lady came running down the sidewalk with an envelope asking to put it in and said it was very important. Her husband's family was one of the original families in Greeley. Her envelope was on top. One of Barbara's sons was lowered into the hole to put that envelope in as the time capsule was already in the ground. Thus the story of the little brother going into the hole. The next story is wonderful. It's from Mary Forbes. She writes that back in 1967, I was the executive secretary to the city manager, Ben H. Cruz. It was my job to see that each department head put information about their departments into a manila envelope for the time capsule. Information such as projects they were doing at the time, what their budgets were, any information they thought might be pertinent to best describe their department. It was not a project they were particularly thought worthy of their time. And there were several departments that waited until, of course, the last minute to get it to her. I was not to read or open any of the envelopes, just make sure they all fit into the capsule. Since I was in charge and no one else would know, I added a small document of my own. After the capsule was closed, I felt terrible. What would people in the future think? Would they have a sense of humor? Would they even get it? Would life as a city employee still be the same? Time will tell. I think that is an envelope. That's an absolute must. We have to find that one and open it up and see what Mary put in there. And then we have Lowell Grauberger, who writes, I was at the closing of the Civic Center Complex time capsule in 1967 and was a member of the Greeley Central High School band present that day to perform. I remember that the plaster on the ceiling of the room we were in was still wet. And when we started playing, the band director accidentally hit the wet plaster with his baton. While we were playing, a glob of the plaster came down on his suit jacket. I also remember that the top item in the capsule before it was sealed was a large roll of a movie projector film, something covered by something that looked like saran wrap. That, I believe, was one of the first items that we saw come out of the box. There's something special about marking time and our significance of place. And that's a big part of what our Greeley history is all about and what I think you've heard from today. It's been special to have an opportunity to share this day and the initial treasures that are in those two time capsules and wonder about what the next 50 years is going to bring for us. And it's up to us to decide. It's been an unusual year, to be sure, but looking back on some of the challenges that Greeley has faced in the past and the country, I think we're up for the challenge. We can do this. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Betsy Kellums.
Thank you, Becky. This has been so much fun. I hope all of you have enjoyed this. Thank you to all of the speakers, and thank you to those who submitted comments, and thank you especially to all of you for joining us. Thank you for celebrating Greeley's 150th anniversary with us, and we hope you enjoyed this and look forward to seeing you at future city events. I am starting to plan the History Brown Bag series for next year with the hope that we will be back in person. So if you have ideas for History Brown Bags or have more comments, we do have an online comment form. So please share your stories and comments, and thank you so much for joining us.